greetings. Today we're getting into chapter 19 of Abeni's song by Djeli Clark. We left off chapter 18 with Abeni even more determined than ever to free the little spirit Asha, to free the children of night who have been captured by the goat man and the witch priest's agenda. And she is just, there is no stopping her. She is going to free them all by any means necessary. Let's see what happens. Chapter 19, The Children of Night. It was well into the next night when Abeni and the others made their way back to the pit. She crouched in the tall grass, looking down below. They had waited here, keeping watch of the tunnels and the slumbering monsters. As expected, the goat man had emerged. Like the night before, 2 monsters walked with him. Only this time, they carried a round iron cage that hung from the middle of a long pole. Inside it sat Asha, just like in the dream. Abeni clenched her teeth at the sight. That evening, Damju's mother had explained the cage's purpose. The goat man kept the girl for her voice and made her sing for him throughout the day. He called her his songbird. Now he walked through his sleeping army and climbed the mound of broken rocks. Standing there, he pulled out his flute and blew. Abeni wanted to cover her ears. The song sounded terrible now. It's awful, Damju agreed. Once you break its spell, it only sounds worse. This is what I've always heard, Naomi muttered. Abeni tried to ignore the terrible music. The monsters had all awakened now and stood there listening as if entranced. There was a familiar rumbling, and they watched as the massive statue pushed up from the ground to tower above the pit. They squinted as the earthen head and iron mask burst into flames, lighting up the night. Abeni looked away from the fiery eyes and to the great bloodstone that sat in the figure's lap. It was what they had come for. Everyone ready? She asked. There were nods all around. She looked over her group. 2 mortal girls, 2 young spirits, and a boy who didn't talk. They were going to attempt what the grown-ups of this village would not, to fight this goat man, to rescue the children. It's time then, she said, just like we planned. They had done so all day, coming up with different ideas until arriving on something they all agreed on. She hadn't thought all of them agreeing on anything was even possible, but they done it. This wasn't just her plan. It belonged to all of them. Now she just hoped it worked. We can do this. We just need to stick to the plan. Damju, Songu, you go first. We'll be right behind you. Zania, I will keep the monsters at bay, the panther girl assured her. I was going to say be careful, Abeni finished. Zania gave a sharp grin. The same to you. Good hunting, Abeni. Abeni grinned back. Turning to the others, she motioned to begin. Damju and Songu walked ahead, finding the rickety ladder and climbing down into the pit. She and Naomi followed, staying close. Damju had been right about her abilities. She made her way without anyone's help and moved easily. Songu came right behind. When the 2 reached the ground, he took hold of her hand and they walked forward. At sight of the pair, the monsters turned, glaring and sending up growls, but none attacked. Instead, they shifted apart, making a path. Abeni and Naomi followed close behind. unseen and hidden by the porcupine girls. Magic. Still, it was unnerving to walk between the monsters. Abeni looked up as they passed, into fiery eyes behind masks of wood and iron. It was hard to believe these were all children, like her. When Songu and Damju stopped at the front of the monstrous crowd, Abeni and Naomi stopped with them. The four gazed up to the towering statue of the witch priest. The iron mask, shrouded in flames, glared back down at them. Behind it stood the twisting giant horn for making music, which looked near completion. Far below, atop the mound, stood the goatman. Lowering his flute, he looked upon the new arrivals from behind his mask of horns. The music he played still echoed into the night as if it had a life of its own. Songu, he said in recognition. His voice was a deep and threatening rumble, like thunder speaking. And little Damju. Abeni's eyes rounded from where she and Naomi remained hidden. He knew her name. If the girl was surprised, she kept her face blank. Do you see my mighty warriors? He gloated to the gathered monsters. Your brother, the great mosquito, has returned, and with a present. Someone who has escaped us for some time. Such loyalty is to be rewarded. Do you see now why I named him Mosquito? Because though he is small, his sting is deep. Songu said nothing, only lowering his head. With a wave of his hand, the goatman called to one of the monsters that flanked him. She stepped forward, handing a necklace of ringlets to him with a small, dull-colored stone. Little Damju, he said, you've never truly seen the world, not with your flawed eyes. But with this, I can grant you sight. He held the necklace high. Damju huffed, unimpressed. My eyes are fine the way they are. The goatman laughed. You have fire. Good. My master so likes fire. Abeni tugged on Naomi's arm. It was time. The porcupine girl responded with an explosion of pink mist, and Abeni found herself floating in a familiar place that smelled heavily of flowers. Naomi claimed that the closer they were to where they needed to go, the surer her jump would be. Hopefully this was enough. Suddenly, Abeni was on solid ground again. Or slightly so, she realized as her foot slipped, almost taking her over a ledge. Naomi grabbed hold of her arm, pulling her back. Regaining her balance, Abeni looked down to find the floor of the pit far below. They were standing on the earthen lap of the statue of the witch priest, as planned. And beside them was what they sought. The giant bloodstone sat embedded, nestled between earthen fingers that appeared to hold it. The size of a boulder, it shimmered like dark red glass and was cut smooth all along its sides. This close, the throbbing of the thing was strong, pounding like a living heart. The many voices that came from it could be heard plainly. Children, calling into the night. They were lost, they said, and couldn't find their way home. Their cries filled Abeni with sadness, and something else was welling up inside her. Anger and intense fury at all of this needless suffering. She was going to end it now. Turning, she lifted her staff and waved it from side to side. It was a signal, and it was met with a fierce roar. A panther the color of night sprang into view. It leaped down the earthen walls of the pit, skidding as it descended, scattering rocks and dirt as it went. When the panther reached the ground, it took off in a burst of speed, getting faster as it went. The first monster that turned to meet it was knocked from his feet as the big cat landed atop it and then bounded for a second. In moments, the pit was in chaos as the panther ran through it and the monsters gave chase. Abeni watched. Danju and Songu had been the first distraction. Zania was the second. All to buy time. Taking her staff, she dug it into the earthen lap of the statue just beneath the giant bloodstone. Sliding it in deep, she pulled down on the length of wood as hard as she could go, grunting at the effort. She had seen men in her village do this, to lift heavy stones, only she wasn't as big as any of them. Naomi, help! The porcupine girl hurriedly moved to join her. Together, the two pulled down, rocking the staff back and forth to get it beneath the great bloodstone. Slowly, the thing began to lift away. Abeni ground her teeth, pulling harder. Almost there, she wheezed, watching as the bloodstone lifted higher and tilted. It was heavier than it looked, but they had managed to shift it nearly onto its side. Abeni's hope rose. This was working. I think that's enough, she panted. Now, together, the two girls braced their backs against the giant stone and began to push. It moved, inching towards the ledge. Abeni wished they had Zania's added strength, but the panther girl was doing her part of the plan, and they would have to do just a bit more. She planted her feet, pushing as hard as she could. She wasn't sure how much longer they could keep this up. Just then, the giant bloodstone teetered on the ledge. There was a moment where it seemed to hover before it finally fell. Abeni held her breath as she watched it drop away. She had remembered the mound of rocks beneath the statue. Damju's mother said the bloodstone was harder than they thought. Dashing it against those rocks seemed like their best chance at getting it to break. The goatman twisted his head to look up, eyes widening behind his mask as he saw the giant crimson stone heading for him. He leapt from the mound just as it came crashing down. The sound caught the ear of everyone in the pit, and they turned as one to watch the bloodstone shatter. At least, that's what Abeni had hoped. The giant bloodstone struck the rocks and rolled onto its side, but it didn't break. The goatman stood to the side as the great stone settled. Then his gaze turned upward. When his eyes landed on the two girls, he pointed a clawed hand and cried out in rage. The monsters in the pit followed his lead, roaring up at them. Several bounded atop the rocks and began scrambling along the base of the statue, making their way up. Abeni, we have to go, Naomi shouted. Abeni! Abeni barely heard the porcupine girl. Her eyes remained fixed on the giant bloodstone, still not believing it hadn't broken. All their planning had been for nothing. A strong shake from Naomi brought her back, and she found herself staring down at a horde of angry monsters. Let's go, she said, hating herself for saying the words. She clasped the porcupine girl's hand, and in a blink they were floating in the pink mist again. Solid ground returned beneath their feet, and she found herself looking at Damju and Songu. I didn't hear it break, the girl said, her face distressed. No, Abeni answered painfully. They had failed. Fresh roars alerted them that the monsters had seen their arrival. With a squeal, Naomi grabbed hold of each, and they were floating once more. Abeni prepared herself to land somewhere out of the pit, wrestling to not let her disappointment overcome her. How would they possibly free Asha now, or the missing children, or her friends? Her thoughts were cut short as something encircled her waist. Before she could look down, she was yanked back hard. Naomi cried out, and instead of floating, they were suddenly falling, the swirling pink mist disappearing. The night welcomed them back, and the ground came up in a rush. Abeni felt a jolt of pain as she landed and tumbled. She managed to lift her head, dazed and trying to figure out what had happened. They were still in the pit. They had never left. She looked down to find a dark rope circling not just her, but the others. Before she could shout a warning, Monsters surrounded them, snarling and pointing sharp weapons. She raised her staff, but clawed hands easily snatched it away. One monster lifted her from her feet. Another lifted up Damju and Songu, but Naomi was left tied. Struggling was useless. Their captors were just too strong. The four were carried to the base of the mound of rocks where the goat man waited and deposited his feet. And they were deposited at his feet. An angry growling came from somewhere behind. Abeni turned to find several monsters dragging a panther bound up in rope like the one that held Naomi. In a blur, the panther shifted into a defiant but haggard Zania. The girl was thrown down beside them, her orange eyes staring up scornfully. "So," the goat man rumbled, "my mysterious visitors of the night return." He moved closer, crouching to inspect them. A clawed hand gripped the ropes that still bound the two spirits, pulling at it harshly. "Naomi," Abeni shouted, "get out of here, jump away." The porcupine girl whimpered, "I can't. I don't feel so well." "I don't either," Zania panted. The goat man laughed, staring down at Abeni from behind his hard mask. "Go," he rumbled. "My master has given me the magic to trap meddlesome spirits." His hand tugged again at the ropes that bound Naomi and Zania. "Last night you caught me unaware. This time I was ready." Abeni stared in dismay. The ropes must have been magic. They were all trapped. "And Songu," he shook his head. "I expected better." He looked to the giant crimson bloodstone that remained unbroken behind him. "Did you intend to steal from me?" He tilted his head in thought. "No, not steal. You sought to destroy it." He stared in surprise for a moment, then burst into bellowing laughter. "Who put you up to this? 4 little girls couldn't have devised such a plan. The villagers? Do those cowards now call on children to protect them?" Abeni didn't answer, instead looking to Naomi and Zania. The two grew weaker by the moment. The porcupine girl's skin took on a sickly hue, and the panther girl was drawing rattling breaths. That rope was killing them. "Let my friends go," she pleaded. "The bloodstone doesn't work on them. You can have me." The goat man eyed her coolly and then rumbled in laughter. "I can have you all, and you are in no place to make bargains, girl." He beckoned one of the monsters forward, who handed over a necklace with a dull-colored stone. Abeni shrank away as the goat man moved to place it over her head, but the other monsters held her still, forcing her neck to bend. "Do not fight it," he said, securing the necklace. "Look at you, so small and weak. I was small and weak once. Don't you tire of it?" He put a clawed hand to her chin, lifting it so their gazes met. "I see pain in your eyes. Someone has done you a great wrong. Wouldn't you like the power to seek your vengeance?" Abeni glared at him in resentment. He had no idea what pain she carried and how much of it was his fault. Seeing her face, he laughed again. "There's anger there too. Good. My master so loves anger." Lifting a knife, he brought it to her shoulder and nicked the skin. She cried out as he drew blood and smeared it on the stone about her neck. "Why are you doing this?" she asked through clenched teeth. "Because I can," he said. "Because I'm strong enough now to seek my own vengeance." He turned to look up at the iron horn. "And when I complete my great instrument, I will send the music across the land to take more children." Do you know how I came by the inspiration? The spirit who once ruled this valley when I slew her, She sent out a final cry, so powerful it entered the dreams of children far, far away. I have been unable to walk dreams so easily, but I thought, what if I could send my song out a great distance so that many children might hear? Abeni knew that beneath that awful mask he was grinning. I will create an army of children turned monsters, an army that their own parents will dare not fight. Together we will march beneath the banner of our master and set the world on fire. He gripped the blood-covered stone about Abeni's neck and squeezed. Smoke hissed from his closed fist, and he chanted things in a tongue not even she could understand. White, hot flames erupted from between his clawed fingers as his body trembled, and he finally went quiet, letting go. Abeni looked down to see the dull-colored stone had changed. It was now a dark red, like blood, and it pulsed in time to the beating of her heart. As she gazed inside it, she saw a single living flame burning bright, like the fire in the eyes of the storm women, like in the eyes of the goat man and the monsters about her. Unable to look away, she stared at it, entranced until she was falling, spinning towards it, into darkness. Abeni lifted her head back up. The flame in the bloodstone was now in her eyes, and it burned fierce. Her skin was hot like she was on fire. She screamed, and the part of her that was Abeni melted away in that heat. Her body began to change, her arms and legs growing longer and muscled. The brown of her skin faded away, replaced by a hard, grayish tone. Curving blades of long ivory bone broke her flesh to run down her forearms with ends so sharp they gleamed. What was once a scream turned into a roar as the fire no longer burned, but filled her with a thrilling power. Rough, monstrous hands wrapped crimson cloths around her new body, fastened together by bits of jagged metal. She pushed them away, rising to her feet to gaze out and inhale the night. Her senses were alive, more than ever before. She basked in the sight of her new brothers and sisters and the commander who stood before her, crowned in goat horns. Behind them towered the image of their terrible master, his fiery face burning bright, a fire that now burned in them all. Around her she could hear the wish song, beautiful and strong in her ears. Her gaze fell to two spirits that lay at her feet. She snarled at the sight of them, her lips curling back to reveal sharp, curving teeth. "Behold you now," her commander praised, coming to stand before her. He clapped his hands, and one of her sisters walked forward, bearing a mask of iron adorned with carved snakes. "For you," her commander said, "the pain you carry is deep. I think you will be of great use." She tilted her head as the mask was placed over her face, leaving only her eyes and chin visible. "You will be my viper, striking down any in my path." She gazed up at him, and from behind the mask grinned widely. Viper. She would come to like that name. What an absolutely horrific outcome. They got captured. That is the worst, y'all. That's the worst. And I could see their plan was actually a very, very good plan to send Damju and Songu in first. Naomi and Abeni hidden in Naomi's magic until they got close enough for Naomi to jump them up to the witch priest statue, where they could do their best to topple over the bloodstone and have it shatter on the ground, because once that shattered, then the children of night would be free. There would be no more monsters. I don't know how that would affect the goat man, but that would probably affect his magic too, because he's also wearing a mask. So I don't know how that would affect him, but it would definitely free the monsters. And then they could fight that one goat man, you know? But that's not how things turned out. And so he was prepared for them this time, because he had that rope that would stifle the powers of the spirits. And of course, the witch priest's sorcery that focuses on the vulnerability of children like Abeni and the others that have been captured. The pain, if they have any pain inside of them, or sadness, or low self-esteem, or anger, or resentment, like those negative feelings that any human being could experience in their lives. People have positive emotions, people have negative emotions. It happens. But the bloodstone magic taps into the most negative ones, and it's like a promise that if you follow me, I can relieve all of your pain and all of your sadness and all of your wants and your wishes, and you'll be powerful and strong. Like, say a child was bullied, it would tap into the feeling of weakness. And then if they were part of that bloodstone, if they followed that wish song, they would feel powerful and actually grow into that big old monster, even change their names. And names are significant. Names have meaning. So now she's no longer a Bani. She is called Viper. And she was feeling that anger and resentment and sadness and rage, and that blood, her own blood, the negativity that was running through her own veins is what's ruling her mind, body, and spirit right now. Unbelievable, man. Unbelievable. So, being that this is not the last chapter in the book, I don't see how, but somehow, Abeni, Zania, Damju, Asha, Naomi, all the children of night, somehow they're gonna win. They got to. They have to. Let's see what happens. Chapter 20, Abeni's Song. The girl who was no longer a girl stood among the children of night, now one of them. Her commander stood beside her in his mask of goat horns. He had gifted her a mask of serpents, along with a new name, Viper. See your enemies. Her commander gestured to the two spirits that lay tied at her feet. One was a girl like a porcupine. She stared up with large, frightened black eyes. Another, like a cat, glared at her behind an orange gaze and bared teeth. She bared her own teeth back. These two cannot receive the blessings of the bloodstones, her commander said. They are spirits and must be cleansed from the land. This is what our master demands of us for his gifts. Reaching to his back, he pulled out a sword of dark iron. Its flat blade was surrounded with barbs of sharp teeth. He offered it to her. Show us that you are worthy of his Gifts. Viper took the weapon from him, gripping the hilt. Holding it made the fire inside her rise higher. She would enjoy this. As she lifted the blade, her commander and the others stepped back, eagerly awaiting her swing. Then, from nowhere, there was singing. Viper turned angrily to find who would dare intrude on her task. They would suffer. Her eyes found a small girl. No, a spirit, locked in a cage of iron. Her song was piercing for one so small, cutting through the night like a knife, competing even with the wish song that played always in her ears. She could not help but listen. The song was about a girl. "Quiet," her commander snarled. "I am to hold you to give over to my master, but I will end you tonight if I must." The small spirit stopped singing and set a pair of dark, piercing eyes on her commander. "It's time for you to end, Goatman. You've caused enough trouble." Her commander's eyes rounded at such insolence. Viper, too, was struck. Filthy spirit! How dare she speak so? "And what will you do, little songbird?" her commander mocked. The small spirit, however, didn't seem afraid. She just shook her head. "I know how the villagers hurt you, how they made you feel small and weak. When the witch priest offered this bad magic, you took it. You thought stealing the children and turning them against their families would make you strong, but it hasn't. You're still small. You're still weak." Viper couldn't understand. What was this spirit talking about? But behind her master's mask of goat horns, his eyes appeared to waver, as if struck to his very core. Then they turned firm again and burned. "You know nothing about me," he shouted in a snarl. "Nothing!" He waved a hand and the bars of the iron cage fell away to clatter on the rocks below. "Viper, end this little one first." Viper turned and moved forward with her blade, eager to obey. She was angry at this small spirit. It felt like an anger she had held onto for a long time. She lifted her sword as that anger fed the fire inside her. But before she could strike, those piercing eyes looked up. They weren't angry, not even fearful. They only looked sad. "I warned you not to get lost in the dark," the small spirit said. "Find your way back. Listen to your song." Then, as before, she began to sing. Her commander bellowed laughter. "Is this what my master's enemies send against him? Weak spirits with feeble magic? Do you not see that his song is greater?" Viper wanted to agree. She wanted to cut down this little spirit who angered her so much. But instead she found she was listening to the song. The girl the spirit sang of had a mother and father and brother. It was her birthday that day when their village had been destroyed. Everyone had been taken. Everything had been lost. The girl thought she'd been left alone, but she found new friends who were lost as well. As Viper listened, a voice called faintly. It was the same girl from the song. She was trapped, locked away in a dark place. She cried out, trying to be heard, pleading to be let free. She was far away, but also somehow very close. Viper shifted her eyes to a great red bloodstone lying among the rocks. It was like the one about her neck, but so much bigger. The girl's voice was coming from there, along with many others, all lost in darkness. She looked down to herself and found something was wrong. This body no longer seemed right. These weren't her legs. These weren't her arms. A clawed hand went to her face and touched a mask of iron instead. None of this was her. "Viper," her commander ordered. "Slay the small one, now!" She looked to him. Viper. Viper? That wasn't her name. Her name was... Abeni shuddered as she came back to herself. What had happened? Where had she gone? She turned to find the goat man glaring, his mouth moving and snarling orders. Down at her feet, Naomi and Zania lay bound, and sitting in a broken cage before her was Asha, eyes closed, singing loudly. Then it all came back, like light filling a dark space. She looked down at her body in horror. She was a monster now, like the rest of them. In her mind, the words of the scrying pot took on their final ominous meaning. Beware the children of night. They become hidden in darkness. To free them, you must seek them, but in finding them, you risk losing yourself. "What are you waiting for?" She looked up. It was the goat man, barking in her ears. "Destroy them," he ordered, the rage in his voice emanating from behind that frightening mask. In her broken cage, Asha had stopped singing. She looked at Abeni now, smiling. "You found the way out, little Rainbringer," the girl said. "You know what you have to do now." Abeni nodded slowly. Yes, she had found her way out of the darkness, and she knew precisely what to do. An image of her mother came then, holding a blade before her, eyes glinting steel, bravely facing off against a storm woman. The memory made Abeni smile. She could be like her mother. She could be just as strong. Lifting her sword, she swung, not down at her friends, but back at the goat man beside her. The blade struck him fully in the face, cracking the horned mask, and he staggered back at the unexpected blow. Using the sword like her staff, she remembered one of the first forms Obi had taught her. Farmer harvests the field, sent the broadside of the blade against the backs of his legs, sweeping him from his feet. He roared in outrage as he went down hard, and then she was moving. The other monsters stood by, momentarily stunned, but they soon charged after her. Still, she had a head start. With a terrific leap, she bounded up the mound of rock, knocking a monster in her path down as she went. Behind her, she could hear the goat man screaming orders to his army that now surged as one towards her. They were all too late. With all her new strength, she swung the iron blade, striking the giant bloodstone. The force of her blow sent fractures racing across its surface, so many that they became impossible to count. The trapped spirits within pushed out at this chance at freedom. She swung her blade again to help them, then once more. As the sword struck the bloodstone for a third time, there was a great blinding burst of light as the trapped spirits shattered their prison into endless shards. The blast sent Abeni flying. She fell from the mound of rocks, landing on the ground below. Around her, she could hear a howling she knew came from the goat man. Then everything went quiet. Wow. So the saying, everything happens for a reason, comes to mind in this instance. The bloodstone was very, 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 very hard to shatter. And I don't see how they would come up with the strength to ever shatter it if she hadn't become one of those monsters and had one of those swords in her hand. And it was the scrying pot had given her a reading about what could possibly happen in her future. Beware the children of night. They become hidden in darkness. To free them, which has been the focus of her journey and her determination, to free them, you must seek them, which is what she's been doing the whole time, her and her entire team. But in finding them, you risk losing yourself. Because although her entire team was there with her, the spirits were unsusceptible to the witch priest's magic. And so she was the only one in danger of losing herself. But the cultural tradition of her song, her oriki, her knowing her history herself, and how it made her remember who she was. I remember in the movie The Black Panther, when the Black Panther's mother yelled that out to him. It was during one of his battles. She said, "Remember who you are." And sometimes we can forget that we're born with certain strengths inside of us, and we get bogged down with the negative emotions. So that bloodstone that was around her neck, that was feeding all the negativity that was in her anger, her rage, her sadness, her fear, her worry, it was feeding all of that. But she was more than her negative emotions. She was powerful, like her mother. And she remembered her name. Her name wasn't Viper. And it's quite telling that when when colonizers colonize indigenous people around the world, they make them change their names. They make them change their ways. They make them forget their story. They try to make them forget who they are. And in forgetting who they are, they're able to make them sing that new song. They're able to make them love a song that has nothing to do with their well-being and everything to do with their own destruction. I mean, he had these children terrorizing their own families. But Asha, which is why the witch priest wanted her on his team, Asha was unfazed by the darkness because she was all light. And her singing voice brought Abeni back to herself. That's beautiful. Love to see it. Now let's see what happens now that the bloodstone has been shattered. Blinking her eyes open, Abeni found Asha kneeling over her. She tried to sit up, but the mask on her head felt suddenly heavy. Lifting her hands to pull it off, she only then noticed they were her own again, brown, not gray, with fingernails instead of claws, and returned to normal size. Throwing off the mask, she felt at her face and smiled in relief. She felt awful, and her head hurt terribly, but she was herself again. "Do you realize that since I've met you," she said to the small spirit wearily, "I've been turned into something unnatural 3 times. Asha cupped Abeni's cheeks in her small hands. "Let's make sure it doesn't happen again. I like this face." She turned to look about. I hope everyone else likes their faces too. Abeni managed to sit up and followed her gaze. Across the pit, the monsters were changing. Some knelt as their bodies convulsed or trembled, growing smaller. Others had transformed fully and stared around in shock as if waking from some long nightmare. Looking down to her chest, she found the small bloodstone. It was a dull rock once more, cold and lifeless. She tore it from her neck and tossed it away. Combo! Dada! It was Damju. The girl shouted into the night in every direction. Voices soon cried back, and she turned towards them. Two older boys who looked much like her ran up, and the three were suddenly embracing and crying. All around there were other tearful reunions as siblings and playmates hugged and greeted each other. At the sight of them, Abeni suddenly remembered her friends. Jumping up, she scrambled over to where Zania and Naomi still lay tied and began undoing the ropes. Some other children who saw her frantic moves dropped to help. In short moments, the two spirits were free. They struggled to sit, shaking their heads and looking around. Glad to have you back, Zania said hoarsely. Glad to be back, Abeni said, relieved. She reached over and hugged her tight. The panther girl went stiff at first, but loosened and weakly hugged back. She reached to do the same to Naomi, but minding the quills, just kissed the girl's furry cheeks. Abeni? Is that you? The voice sent her still, like someone had grabbed at her heart and tugged. She turned slowly around, not even daring to breathe. Two girls stood behind her. One was short and staring at her dazedly. The other was looking everywhere at once, like someone trying to figure out if she was in a dream. At the sight of them, Abeni didn't know whether to laugh or shout or cry. As she ran forward to wrap up both in a terrific hug, she decided to do all three. Foamy. This was Foamy, her best friend. She shouted the girl's name over and over again, fearful that if she stopped, the moment would no longer be real. The taller girl was Sowoki. Silly, stupid Sowoki. She shouted her name too. She had never wanted to hold on to anyone more. She'd found the stolen children of her village. She'd found them. Abeni, Foamy managed. I don't think I can breathe. Oh, Abeni let go but kept her hands on them. They were real. They were here. Where is this? Foamy asked. She looked around, confused. What's happening? Abeni sighed. Oh, Foamy. There's so much to tell. Do you not remember? Foamy frowned, opening her mouth silently. It was Sowoki who answered. I remember. The girl's voice was a thin whisper, but the gaze she locked on Abeni was full of meaning. I remember everything. A terrible look came across Foamy's face then, and she began to shake. Abeni reached back out to her friend, but Sowoki wrapped an arm about the shorter girl, holding her as she trembled. Not knowing what to say, Abeni remembered the others and quickly called them over. I would like you to meet my friends, new friends, Naomi, Zania, and this is Asha. Foamy's eyes widened at the sight of Naomi and Zania, who had stayed in their spirit forms. Sowoki took them in stride, but blinked at Asha. Have we met? The little girl grinned. Abeni was wondering how to explain that when someone cried out, Everyone turned and began walking to a figure that lay curled in a ball at the base of the mound of rocks. A man, Abeni could see. He was short, his thin body covered in thick furs much too big for him, and his head hidden behind an overly large mask of goat horns, cracked from where she'd struck it. Abeni bent down to grab hold of the mask and pulled it off. Beneath was a surprisingly plain face, older and bearded, but not frightful or menacing at all. "Goat man," Asha said with disapproval. "You've been very bad." "You're not a monster at all," Abeni murmured in surprise. "You're just a man." "No," Sawoki said, her voice tight. "He's very much a monster." He glared up at them bitterly, snarling. "I was almost a god. You took it from me. You took it!" More children had come over and now stared down at the man. "Do you know him?" Abeni asked. A boy nodded. "His name is Brima. He herds our goats." "He's from your village?" Zania asked. "One of your own did this?" "I was never one of them," Brima spat. "I was no one to them. They treated me like nothing. They laughed at me and put me to doing children's work, herding their goats. But my master made me strong, and I took all their children away." He laughed scornfully. Abeni had no idea what to make of this man, so different from what she expected. Before any more could be said, a sudden rumbling came. All eyes turned to look to the massive statue of the witch priest. Its head no longer burned with flames, and the entire structure trembled and shook. Whatever power had held it together seemed to have vanished with the giant bloodstone. As they watched, the masked head began to creak and wobble. Everyone scrambled back as it broke off from the statue and tumbled away. It came crashing down on the rocks below, burying the standard with a single flame. The smoldering iron mask fell off and rolled just before them, almost crushing a yelping Brima. Abeni grimaced at the sight of the thing. It was easily taller than any of them. She wondered if one day the real witch priest would fall so easily. "We should get out of here," Naomi exclaimed. Abeni agreed. Everything about them was collapsing. She pointed to the rickety ladders where other children were already making their climb out of the pit. "What of the great horns?" Annie asked. At her words, the giant, headless statue began crumbling. Rock and dirt came crashing down on the iron contraption, burying it and breaking off the flaring head that tumbled down with a clang upon the rocks below. "That will do it then," the panther girl nodded. They turned to go, but there was a shout. "Wait!" It was Brima. The man was trying to disentangle from his giant goatskin furs and fumbling after them. "You won't leave me here, will you? You can't!" Before they could answer, someone else spoke. "We'll take care of him." They turned to find Damju's brothers with some other older children nearby, holding a lengthy rope at the ready. Seeing their faces, the once terrifying goat man shrank back and whimpered. So the goat man is defeatable. The bloodstone is defeatable. And they kept the faith. They stuck together. They did the impossible. They made the impossible possible with their faith in themselves, with the power of remembering especially Abeni, remembering who she was and breaking the spell of the negative emotions that entangled her into the bloodstone and connected her to that negative bloodstone sorcery. And in freeing herself from that negativity, she was able to free the others around her. Love it. I love it. And the goat man is way more goat than he is man. Abeni's father and uncles, and even the man that Tutuo, the man from the veil of lost things, those are men. They protect and provide and care for those around them. The goat man. And then he had the nerve to ask them to help him. Sir, you chose all of this. Not only for yourself, you dragged all of us into it with you. But that's okay, because the older boys were probably already initiated. They probably already had their initiation, and they had been trained in the ways of how men conduct themselves, men of good character. And so they had the ropes ready for the goat man, because there was no way he was just going to be allowed to, I don't know what the village is going to do with him, but that coward definitely deserves to be dealt with in whatever way they choose. Wow. I feel lighter knowing that Abeni, it was beautiful how knowing her true history, not that new name the witch priest Peon gave her, not that new ideology that the wish song tried to implant in her head, but her true song, her true culture, her true self, her true identity. When these children were monsters, that was a real identity crisis, and it was ruining each one of them. It was ruining their families. It was even ruining the land that they walked upon. The very earth, the ground that they walked upon was being ruined, dying because of their identity crisis. Abeni's song. Thankfully, the little spirit, Asha, was there to sing it to her. Just like she called Abeni the rain bringer, Asha is the light bringer. Now, let's see what happens when they all get back to the village. Next chapter is the final chapter, chapter 21, Homecoming. Until next chapter.